right, so welcome to another episode of the Launch School podcast. Today, we are doing an episode that I'm super excited for. We're going to be answering questions about why Launch School is the way it is. As a student, and I'm sure others can relate, one thing that drew me to Launch School was this sense of transparency. So that's what today is all about, is explaining the whys behind Launch School. We have a list of questions that we've taken from current students, Launch School curious people, and even from some folks who decided not to enroll in Launch School at all. So we'll start by giving just a bit of background about Launch School and how we got here, and then Chris is going to answer some of our questions. Hey, Chris.
Hey, great to be here. Happy to see you, Brandi.
Thanks. Yeah, good to be here.
Excited to explain why we do things. I get so many of these questions, and just thought it'd be nice to collect a list of questions and just address them.
Mm-hmm. And so we were thinking that a bit of background might help so that we have a sense of where we're starting from. And that, I think, answers a lot of questions that people have already. So do you want to give us some background on how we ended up here, how Launch School came to be?
Yeah, sure. I think, so we've been doing this for a long time, right? And I've been doing this for a long time. I've been teaching people. I've been a software engineer for a long time, and I've been teaching people for a long time as well. And so one of the things that I notice is people who are new to Launch School come in, they have a lot of ideas, not knowing that there's been like a decade of trial and error and experimentation in terms of teaching people programming. Obviously, I'm always interested in ideas and feedback and all that. But I thought I'd take some time to give a background so that people can understand the context and how we arrived here. And many of these ideas that people give us tend to be, things that we've already tried, and we decided that we didn't want that set of trade-offs, right? And so at Launch School, we've expressed a different set of trade-offs. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's something we, out of ignorance, but a lot of times it's things that we've already tried. So I'll explain that a little bit. But have you read that article, Brandi, that I wrote back in 2018 that I actually put in the prep course? It's called From Boot Camp to Mastery.
Yeah, I think I read it all the way at the beginning when I was starting, but then Medium sent it to me again recently, and I had to read. Yeah. Okay,
great. Yeah. That's sort of our origin story, our genesis for how we came to Launch School. Launch School is not my first take at teaching people programming concepts. So, way back in the day, 2011, 2012-ish, is when I first started to teach people code. At that point, I already had about 10 years of programming software engineering experience, had a variety of different jobs, from enterprise software to running my own startup to working at startup. And at the time I was an engineering manager, hiring people, running teams, team lead, that type of thing. And teaching people was on the forefront of my mind just because it was very difficult to hire people in San Francisco at the time. So the first foray into programming was very ad hoc, very much so a lot of people know that before Launch School, I had a different program called T-Leaf Academy. I'm talking about now even before T-Leaf Academy. This is even before then, where it was just an exploration into teaching people programming. Mm-hmm. And, I approached it in a very ad hoc way, very much, what do you want to learn, right? Mm-hmm. Again, at that time, I had 10 years experience, a variety of different jobs, and all the things that people listed as things they wanted to learn were things that I was comfortable covering. Mm-hmm. So typical things would be like, I want to learn how to build APIs, or I want to learn TDD, or I want to learn how to use this framework or that framework. At the time, Ruby on Rails was very, very hot, and so it was a newer framework, and so now it's more established, but a lot of activity for that. So want to learn frameworks, right? Mm-hmm. And And I said, yeah, sure, let's do it.
So
Let's go for it.
these were mostly people who already had programming experience.
All kinds. So this is how there was a couple of programming listservs or newsletters or discussion groups, not Reddit, but they were like email groups. Anybody could just like reply. This used to be a thing. It's less popular now, but it used to be a thing, mailing lists. And I remember I just posted something like, hey, I'm a super experienced programmer, software engineer. I'm willing to teach, like 20 people. And I think just to add a little bit of commitment, I added a price in there. I forget what it was. It was like $50, $100, something like really low, just to make sure that people have some sense of commitment.
A minimum filter.
Yeah, minimum set of commitment. And tons of people responded, right? And because it's low cost and we were doing live instruction, live coding, and I forget the initial class size. I think it must have been like 20 to 30, and we just had to cap it. We just could not take more, right? Especially our first foray into programming. I just asked them, what do you want to learn? What do you want me to cover on our I think we met like every day or every other day. It was pretty aggressive. It's like 3 days a week. So what do you want me to cover in these live sessions? So they would list out these topics and then we would go cover them, right? It's like TDD, let's go. First lesson, start TDD API. It's like, you can just tell. Nobody knew anything or very few people did, out of 20, 30. Some of the questions were very interesting because they were either like super advanced, which is like 1 or 2 people in the whole class, or very basic, or you would give them an answer and you can just tell they didn't understand the basics, right? So like you can't TDD if you don't know like basic object-oriented programming principles, just like objects and things like that, right? Or pass by reference versus pass by value. Like I'll pass this object in and this happens, right? And just like, how does that work?
Right. This was like a one-room schoolhouse. You had all levels in one room.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
Yeah, it went as what you would expect, right? And so at the end, you always could find a few people that were just like, that was the most amazing thing ever. I can't believe I paid $50 for it. And, did this for like months, right? A couple months, just meeting 3 times a week for hours. And I was younger, more energetic, right? Just spent hours with people. Doesn't really matter. And, it was totally chaotic as you would expect, right? And I remember we even built like some apps because, I'm a programmer. I like to build stuff. I built like in-house apps to track attendance and all this stuff. And we would show everybody like hoping to shame them into attending. But the histogram of the attendance as the weeks go by. So the y-axis would be like the people, right? Like it'd be like Joe, Bob, etc., right? Like the y-axis. The x-axis is time, like week 1, week 2, so on and so forth. Day 1, day 2. And you just see the slope. It's just like a perfect triangle going down. Like every session we lose 2 people kind of thing, right? By the end, by basically the last quarter of the course, we're doing basically 1-on-2, 1-on-1.
It's the people who are like, this is amazing. I can't believe I paid $50 for this. I
can't believe I paid $50 for this. And that was an interesting experience, right? And what I realized is people like, why do they ask for these things if they don't know basic programming foundations? Why do they ask to learn APIs and TDD and frameworks and all this stuff? And what they're doing is they're looking at job postings, right? They're looking at job postings and then they're saying, okay, cool. Like these are the skills that I need to get a job at this company. They're all asking for these skills. So then I want to learn these skills. And over time, what I realized is that's like looking at the job posting of like a neurosurgeon and not having taken like biology 101 or anatomy 101 and going
day 1, they're like, what's an API?
Yeah. Like,
I want to build APIs. So what's an API?
I don't know what HTTP is.
Yeah.
But I want to build APIs. And it's like, wow, no, you have to know what HTTP is, right? And so what's not listed in the job description for a neurosurgeon is biology 101. That's just
implied.
It's implied. There's all these like advanced knowledge of tools, processes, machines, software, practices, things like that, right? It's not going to be like anatomy 101. And so in our field, and I feel like in a medical field, that's pretty obvious, but in our field, it's less obvious, right? Why can't I learn APIs? Why can't I learn TDD? Why can't I learn how to use a framework and build my idea? Mm-hmm. So the reaction to that was T-Leaf Academy. So T-Leaf Academy was like, okay, we've done this for like a year or something like that, learned a lot, or maybe it was 6 months, I forget, but it was not an insignificant. We did that training thing a couple times at least, and it's just saw the same things over and over, and was like, well, this is very unsatisfying, right? And T-Leaf Academy was a solution to that. So first of all, T-Leaf Academy courses were self-paced. Right, so self-paced. That was number one. No more live instruction. We still did live sessions on Saturdays, just to do some live component. But everybody was already self-paced. Like prior to T-Leaf Academy, those sessions, everybody was basically like, "Are these recorded? Are these recorded?" Because they're not going to attend. They're like, I can't follow, but I want to save the recording for the future. So for T-Leaf Academy, they're all recorded, and we broke up into a 4 month. Well, it's self-paced, but we estimate 4 months, right? Mm-hmm. So the first course was 1 month. The second course was 1 month. The third course was 2 months. The entire sequence costs about $2,500 ish. I forget exactly how much it is, but something like that. First course, our 1 month course, was meant to slowly ramp people up, right? Introduction to programming, networking, databases. Mm-hmm. One course, no frameworks, but those foundational concepts that we thought would ramp people up. Course 2 was a 1 month course on introduction to Rails, a framework, like building a prototype with it. Course 3 was all the stuff that people listed: TDD, APIs, integrating with like payment processors, building your own SaaS product that can take monthly recurring payments. Everything's TDD'd, right? Unit tests, integration tests, functional tests, integrating with third-party providers, sending emails, et cetera, right? That's the third course. Mm-hmm. Now, being in launch school, you know how hilarious that curriculum is, because launch school core is nothing but the first course.
Yeah.
Is nothing
but. I was thinking that sounds a lot more like a normal, quote unquote, boot camp that we see now. So I'm interested in how that went. Yeah,
that was better than the first one, but right. Nonetheless, we had graduates that I would say it's 50-50 shot in terms of whether or not they really understood things and whether or not they were job ready. And if they were not job ready, it was due to a couple things. One is they really didn't take time to learn the material. We didn't have assessments, I should mention, right? It was just coursework. And we would check on people like, hey, how's your course? Did you enjoy it? Yeah, I loved it. How'd you like this and that? Oh, it was great. Awesome. Right? Glad you had a good time. Go to the next course, right? And when people finished this course, went and applied for jobs, some people would ace interviews and do really well. Other people would not at all. I remember I actually referred a couple of graduates to some contacts I had. And this is when I can really talk to both sides. I can talk to the employer, and I can also talk to the candidate, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought these graduates were really, really good, know their stuff. Mm-hmm. Crash and burn, come back, and I say, why? What happened? They're like, well, they just asked me some questions that I just wasn't ready for. Like, what questions? Like this question. I'm like, oh, that's perfect. We actually covered that exact exercise in our curriculum. It's like, no, I just froze.
Was course 1.
That was course 1 or 2. I just froze, right? Uh-huh. Or I'll go talk to the employer side, right? They'll just be like, yeah, I don't know what to do. Like, I trust you, Chris. I trust you. I trust that you know what you're talking about, but they just didn't perform.
I just can't hire them based on that. Yeah.
Yeah. It just and I had my employee, my software engineer interviewing them, and they just completely froze. And hearing a lot of these stories made me realize there's 2 problems here with the curriculum. One is making sure people truly understand something before moving forward, right? Like in course 3, where we do all this advanced stuff, so many questions came up. And if you really zoom in on like why they don't understand, it's like they don't understand the foundations covered in course 1, right? And then I'm like, oh, remember this from course 1? It's like, I kind of do, but to be honest, I went through that kind of fast because I really want to get here. It's like, well, now that you're here, how do you feel? It's like, well, it feels really, really chaotic and difficult to process, very, very complex, right? The complexity compounds.
Yeah.
And then people just feel like, oh, I can't do it because of the compounding complexity. And the way you tackle compounding complexity is to deconstruct concepts and sit with it, right? Individually before you compound them together. So so that's one, the complex, and the two is just the interview performance. That's another thing I noticed is so many people would say, I froze, I wasn't ready for the interview. And then we added mock interviews. But that was really not useful because they would have an interview coming up, next Tuesday, and we would do a mock interview Thursday, and then they would bomb the mock interview. And then I would say, great, good luck Tuesday. There's not enough time to do anything about that. Right. Yeah. So now I know,
too late.
And we both now know you freeze on interviews. Are you going to postpone your Tuesday interview? What are you going to do? Right. Are you just not going to interview, like just walk away from it because you're not ready? Or take it and likely experience a similar thing again, right? You have a better chance now that you know and have experienced a mock interview, but just a couple days a week is not enough time, right? So mock interviews were good, but they didn't really fully solve the problem. So these two issues consistently came up. Just people not being ready to do the stuff in course 3. And then getting crushed by the format of the interviews. So then the next iteration of education curriculum really wanted to address these two particular issues, right? Came up with a couple things, as you know now. First is assessments, right? And second is exposing people to interviews ASAP. It's a feature. It's supposed to be a feature, right? And you're like, I don't want that feature. I just want to learn stuff. Literally every other place does that, right? Launch School is like the only one that exposes people to rigorous interview quality assessments early. And again, it's supposed to be like a notification to you and say, because we've done it the other way and there's not enough time to deal with it, right? So if you freeze on interviews, that you quote unquote know the material, but I can't do it on interviews, right? Or this is like, you're being too strict, right? Launch School, you're being too strict. It's more or less a notification for you that when you go to job interviews, that's what they want. Right?
And starting early, right?
And now you have a chance to correct that or to take action on that. It doesn't have to be at Launch School, but you're now aware versus having gone through this whole thing. So that's one thing I felt really bad about TLIF Academy. Awesome course. We have graduates that have launched great careers out of those set of courses. But we also have a lot of people who finished it and really don't have anything to show for it. Because, they went through it quickly and, didn't really master the material.
Right.
So Launch School is if you contrast Launch School with TLIF Academy, it's really revealing. We did like a 180. Like the entirety of the core curriculum is that first course.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's no the two other courses, the 3 months out of the 4 months of the TLIF Academy courses are not in the core curriculum. Right? So we did a complete 180. On top of that, we added assessments. So that's the context. Now that's in that blog article. So if you've read it, I'm sorry, just repeated it. But if you haven't read it, hopefully that was illuminating for like how we got to our current state in Launch School.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's easy to see how, coming from the industry, you didn't foresee people needing an entire core curriculum of that first course. You were like variable scoping next, and actually people need a lot more than that, especially
not
if they
even
don't
variable
have much
scoping.
Experience.
Yeah, and you just kind of zoom into people. You're like, where are you stuck? It's like, you're stuck on this. How come you're stuck on that? Oh, you don't understand this concept. Why don't you understand that concept? Oh, it's not covered. Okay. then we deconstruct it, like pass by reference versus pass by value. Why are we so like fanatical about that? Is because when you get to later topics where we just assume you know it, you won't be able to debug your way out of it, right? Or variable scoping. Why do you have to memorize all the variable scoping rules? Same reason, right? You won't be able to control your code if you are not aware of the scope of your variables. And so these are just like, it's like the multiplication table, right? You're going to need it. And you need to memorize it. Some things need memorization, right?
Right. And to make the most use out of your time and instruction, right? I have to be able to, as an instructor, assume that you know these things and that you know them well and can apply them.
Yeah, that was the hardest part about the live synchronous courses was you can just tell some people had a lot of experience. They were already working developers for many, many years. So they were able to keep up. And then like the vast majority were not. But the vast majority who were not did not feel comfortable asking any questions. And they can tell too, like as me as an instructor, I was like ready to move forward too, right? I wanted to like keep showing the cool stuff. And so like 90% of the class would just suppress their questions and confusion because they know that if we were to really make sure everyone's clear, we would be talking about variable scope for the next hour, right?
Right, yeah.
And then the next lesson would be, mutation. And the next lesson would be like some very basic thing versus TDD and API. But then, there was a couple of people that seem to be a follow along. So everyone just kind of chills. And this becomes basically a live session for 2 people. This becomes a course for 2 people. Right. And that was a dynamic that was pretty evident in a live setting. And it's very, it's pretty wild because we are just teaching people with like, I don't know what grade you're in terms of the technical competency, right? At least in school, if you're teaching like high school juniors, that they're like, hopefully they got some ability coming into as a high school junior. When you're just teaching the general public, you don't know what the baseline is, right? And it's difficult. People self-assess. It's just like, oh, I'm really good at this, and then it turns out they're not, or like they're like, I'm not good at this, and it turns out they are. So the self-assessments aren't really accurate either.
Right. Great. Well, that's a great introduction. I learned a lot in that. I think the article covered some, but it was interesting to hear from you firsthand. It kind of is a nice segue into some of the assessment-related questions that we have. And I think you touched on some of these reasons in that little brief, but there's still some I think that you might have something to add on to. So first, I just want to, there's always some people out there who want to know, like, why do we have to do interview assessments? The person who has social anxiety or the person who is just like, this is really hard for me. I can't do this. I can learn the content, but don't put me on the spot like that. Like, why do I have to?
I mean, that's just how employers interview. The mandate for launch school is to drive people to high-paying jobs. If you remove that mandate, then we can remove the interviews, right? Just like what I saw in Tea Leaf Academy, it's like you're going to experience this. And the question is, do you want to experience this with an actual company that you're interviewing with? Or do you want to experience it in a safer educational setting? And so like we've done it the other way. We've done it the way where we didn't have interviews. And like I said, the graduates were 50-50, right? Some people, they're naturally good, or I should say naturally, but they're good interviewers from their previous experience somehow, right? Whether from school or from their previous work or whatever, they've already learned that skill. My hope for exposing people to interviews so early is that if you don't, it's actually for people that are actually struggling with interviews. It's not for people who don't struggle with interviews.
Right.
It's a feature of like, notice that you struggle with interviews, work to address it, right? Versus finishing the entirety of the curriculum and then still not being able to get a job not because of technical ability, but because of your interview performance.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the goal. That's the goal. It's not meant to be punitive at all.
Yeah. Right. It's an opportunity. It's a sometimes painful and uncomfortable opportunity, but it's an opportunity. And In my soft skills workshop that I run, I always tell people that if you totally flop at a job interview, they're not going to call you afterwards and give you feedback on how you did, right? They're not going to say, oh, you know what, George, like you did well on this aspect, but actually this thing you did came off as a bit childish or unprofessional. And the way you did this, so it's an opportunity that even if you do not, pass with flying colors, you get feedback, and that's great.
Yeah, I feel like social media, Reddit, full of confusion on the job hunt, right? They're asking for this. I did everything. I answered the question perfectly. How come I didn't get moved forward? How come? They're not going to tell you, like, oh, you said something inappropriate, or you hemmed and hawed for too long, or you had like all these awkward pauses. They're not going to say that, right? Yeah. Like in our assessments, we actually list it out. And just at Launch School, that's our job, right? So hopefully people don't get mad at us. This is, our job is to give you feedback, right? You sign up for that. And we try to do it nicely. But it's one of the few places where you will get feedback about that, right? Yeah. And it's not, the assessments aren't meant to be a perfect thing. But I think what's hard about interviews and people don't realize is that there is a performative aspect of interviews that is beyond the curriculum of Launch School to teach. But I do want you to feel it. There's a performative aspect to it. So it's not just like, I know the material, why can't I pass? Mm-hmm. It's that you have to perform the recitation of that knowledge and mastery in an interview setting. Mm-hmm. You have to perform it, and that's what people are looking for. Now, you could question why are companies interviewing this way, et cetera, but, that's beyond the scope of what we do, right? We can say they are interviewing this way, and so therefore we're going to try to expose you to it early. But I think there is a lot to be said about the work having a large performative aspect as well in terms of communicating with colleagues, meetings, giving presentations, giving demos. These are all performances, right? Mm-hmm. And you need to be able to do that at a very baseline level. It's not just about, I understand the code in my head, but I can't really express it to anybody else.
Yeah.
Right? But if you give me code, I can solve it.
Mm-hmm. It's like, well, what about the other people working on the project with you, right?
Yeah.
The proof is in the pudding with those other interviews we've been doing with capstone grads, where every single one of them is saying, I have the huge part of my job is communicating with other people, meetings, being put on the spot, being put under pressure. Great. So it's an opportunity. If you have fun and enjoy it, that's great. If it's a struggle, it's an opportunity for growth.
It's for the people who struggle, frankly speaking. It's
right.
The people who already are great speakers from a job or school or whatever. Great. Mm-hmm. Time to perform. Happy to have you. Mm-hmm. But I actually feel like the interviews are for people who struggle the most. It's like, good. I'm so glad we detected that early versus what happened at T-Leaf Academy where we did mock interviews. It's like, good luck tomorrow. Sorry, that was terrible. But, let me know how it goes tomorrow, and it won't be better tomorrow, right?
Yeah. And the students who have a hard time in the beginning, I've seen a ton of growth, mostly in confidence. A ton of growth from that first interview to, the interview at the end of the back-end curriculum, just huge growth. So they're good. Okay. Next, let's talk about, and I think this question comes mostly from people who don't actually end up signing up for Launch School, but it's a valid question, which is there's this kind of like not yet limit that if we get 6 not yets, you may be asked to leave. If I want to give you money to access your curriculum, why would you say no, Chris? That seems silly.
Yeah, so we have to have some limit. And so we have a limit. The reality is that it's not like a surprise. I've always said this. I think Launch School is designed. I feel like, I wrote an article about like being an education engineer, right? I don't think of myself as like a teacher or educator, but I bring like that software engineering mindset to processes and trade-offs, analyzing trade-offs. And that's how I think about education. And I think Launch School as currently designed, from free prep to low monthly payment, well, low in quotes, right? Low, for core to then high severe pay and capstone, that is designed very deliberately, from a process standpoint. And in core, there's a lot of positive outcomes, including coming to check us out for a month or two and then saying, this is not for me. I don't like the interviews. I'm going to go do something else. Totally okay. I don't like the fact, how you guys write or whatever. Totally fine. If you are here for a long time and you're making progress, you're going to level up. It's mandatory in a mastery-based system, right? So as long as you're making progress, you're going to level up. The only negative outcome is if you're here for a long time and you don't make progress. I don't want your money in that case. I don't want you to be here in that case. When you have a lot of not yets, that's the situation we're in, right? We're in a situation of like not being able to make progress and spending a lot of money, and you're at risk at that point of that like one negative outcome that can be true in core, right? Not worried when people come and go in core. Happy for that. Happy also when people finish core, right? Or make significant progress in core. But if you're not making progress and you're paying money month after month after month, don't want that. So we want to talk to people about like what's going on. How come all these not yets are happening? Are we not giving the right advice? Are you not taking action on that advice? Is there not enough time in a day in your schedule? What is it? What can we do to help? Right? And we just want to talk about that. And we talk to students well before they reach the limit of 6 not yets.
Right.
Right. At the point of 6, I think it's what we're saying is at that point, we reserve the right to end this relationship, right? Because something's happening here that just, it's not aligned. Something's not aligned, right? And again, I want to avoid that worst case scenario.
Yeah. So that's a very like the individual perspective, and something that I think of when I think of students, being asked to leave. I think usually it doesn't happen. I think usually students choose to leave on their own. But something that I love about Launch School, and that I'm always talking about in study groups, is that everyone here is so excited to learn, and there's such a high standard. And the student base, everyone here holds themselves to such a high standard. So I think that's kind of the community part of that too, is that there's a high bar for, we're not too cool for school. We're not just sliding by. We're not C's get degrees. So do you think that's also like a benefit?
I've not heard that. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is also, for me, whenever I learn something, I'm just about show me where the bar is, show me how high to jump. But if you don't show me, that's on you. But if you show me and I don't do the work, that's on me, right? And the assessments are calibrated with our student body, right? So it's what we expect software engineers to know, and to be able to perform on interviews, right? So it's not enough to know and not be able to perform. You have to know and perform it, because that's what the job is. And so our student body here is all about that, right? If you don't have that prior to coming to Launch School, then it's about establishing those abilities and skills, both the knowing and the performing. So yeah, student body is the key. It's the absolute key. And it's not like 90% people don't pass the assessments. We calibrate it too. We also carefully monitor our assessments to see, right? If people are not passing, like when we first started Launch School, we were very worried about the assessments, right? We just and everybody who took one, we were just asking them questions left and right afterwards about it, right? So because those assessments in the early days were not as calibrated, now they are. They're very calibrated now, and so now I think, unless we made like a terrible mistake on a new assessment or something like that. But now I think it's more, how come everyone else is passing and you're not? And what can you do to pass? I think that should be the question. Not like this assessment's unreasonably difficult, because the pass rate is very high for these assessments. I can tell you that. It's not low. It's much
Yeah.
higher than you would expect.
Yeah. And
So people are
tons of
passing them.
feedback. Tons of feedback. I mean, for like the people listening, you fill out feedback after an assessment. And there have been so many times just since I've been a TA where someone feels like there's a little bit of a miswording of a question or kind of a gotcha, and that gets addressed. So, I mean, over the years, I think the assessments have been several iterations. It's not just like a jump through this hoop, right? It gets changed and modified.
When did we do the launch school? Started in the December 2015. So we're coming out at the end of 2023. That'd be 8 years, right? 8 full years, and especially the early assessments. I think those are the most battle tested, right? Calibrated. They're most calibrated. So I think it's one of those things like, hey, if all the other software engineers, future software engineers, can't do this, right? Rise to the challenge is kind of how I try to encourage people to think about it. Rise to the challenge, and you go out there outside of launch school, you're gonna do great. People are gonna be like, whoa, what did you learn to speak like that? What did you learn
so
how to
precise.
Perform?
Yeah.
What did you learn how to perform like that? What did you learn how to communicate like that? I was forced to at launch school, right? And you'll impress people, right?
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Okay, so this one's a bit related, but maybe you can just kind of wrap up for us on the assessment part, that people kind of hear these rumors that someone can get a not yet, right? A block that says you have to go back and retake this assessment with a grade of a B. I mean, a B is not a bad grade, right? So why is the standard so high for passing an assessment?
So this is true, especially for interviews. I already said interviews there's a performative aspect to this. Performances are judged subjectively. So there's a little bit of subjective judgment here for sure. We do our best to be objective. We have multiple people that can look at performances and give a score. But sometimes it's on the fence, and it just, there's enough hesitation to warrant a not yet, right? So, and I think I just want to separate knowing the content versus being able to perform the exercise. I want to just separate those two things, because I hear so much of like, I know the material, how come I can't pass? And what I want to say is, it's not enough to know the material. You have to be able to perform the material in the context of that performance, whatever it is. And this is what work is, right? When you talk to a colleague, right? When you give a presentation, these are skills that are required, right? So that's why sometimes, even though the score is relatively high, like a B is great. Having B level knowledge in our assessment, I think it's an achievement. But yet you still might get a not yet, right? You still might get a not yet. And this goes back to also job interviews. I mean, I don't know that you can aim for a B on a job interview.
Right.
You have to aim for an A+, and then you have a chance, right? You have a chance. So it's also just priming our students to aim for perfection, knowing that you're not going to hit it. And so that if you do slip, you slip to an A- or an A or something like that. And that's how you're going to do well on job interviews too, right? You aim for that really, really perfect score. And I think this is one of those things where, like, if you were to hire like a car mechanic to fix your car, would you be like, hey, I have a A car mechanic and I have a B car? You'd be like, definitely not B, right?
Yeah.
Like, I need my car.
Do I have a choice? Right.
Yeah, it's one of those things where just like, I think we put so much demands on others, like other vendors that we deal with in day-to-day life, and somehow we don't put those demands on ourselves when we're trying to train. And I feel like if you want high-paying roles, what does that mean? You're going to work on critical systems, right? You're going to work on important systems. Okay, just think about the software you use. Do you want a B-level knowledge person to work on that? You know? And so I just feel like putting that demand for excellence that we have for everyone else and to just like turn it into ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what we're trying to coach people into at Launch School. Getting a not yet is not the end of the world. It's a safe place to do so. Everywhere else in the world, they don't give you a BA and a not yet. They just say, nice meeting you. You were great. We're looking for more experience. And so, Reddit is full of this confusion. Like, why would they interview me if they're looking for more experience? My resume is already there. That's just what they say. That's a generic saying. It's not the reason. The real reason is not stated. They don't want to make anybody mad or anything like that. They don't want pushback. It's like, well, I disagree with this assessment. It's like, God, forget it, right? Yeah. They're not going to change their mind, right? Yeah. So getting a B, getting a not yet, and not all Bs are not yets, I should say. We also have a conditional pass as well. So sometimes we feel like people are on the fence. They're, pretty good, but they have a couple holes here and we want them to fulfill some condition. And then that's a pass. So there's a lot of fuzziness here for sure.
And I think that's kind of the big picture answer. And as someone in the curriculum, the kind of immediate answer as well is that it's easier to spend a couple more weeks studying in RB 109 or JS 109 and really solidifying your knowledge of these basic concepts than it is to move on to learning object-oriented concepts, but still having to use a bunch of your, working memory to think about these basic concepts that you haven't nailed down yet. So really, it's a favor to you in a sense that it sets you up for success in later courses.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen what happens with B-level knowledge. I mean, we just talked about T-Leaf Academy courses, right? No assessments, right? And so what happens? More confusion is what happens. That's what happens, right? So I've seen it. Or it's a 50-50 chance, right? And so all we're saying is this: instead of finishing a curriculum where you have a 50-50 chance of like bombing, you're gonna have a much higher chance of doing well. You have a 10% chance or less of bombing. Let's say something like that, right? It's not zero, but you're going to be far more prepared. And so like, where do you want to experience that? Do you want to experience that when you're interviewing with jobs at companies, or do you want to experience it in the core curriculum?
A safe space, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of rare to say, I don't want to experience it anywhere, right? It's just like, well, then you're fully formed. But yeah. Then you're fully formed. Then it doesn't matter if you do launch school or a boot camp or read a couple books. Just do whatever you want. You're good. But actually, the interviews and all this, assessments is for people who are like, look, I don't want to take my chances, on an interview and cross my fingers and see what happens, right? Because we used to not have that. I mean, T-Leaf Academy could have been a thing. We've had 6 people get 6-figure jobs out of our T-Leaf Academy courses, right? We had that, but just the hit rate wasn't high, right? Whereas the core curriculum, my goodness, I mean, I don't think I know anybody who can't get a job out of the core curriculum. I know that's a common question. I mean, I know there are people right now, graduates of a core curriculum, who are looking for jobs. Which is fine. It's a tough market right now, but I think they'll land. They will land. But I don't see anybody, core graduates that just are totally lost and confused and felt it was like a total waste of time and back to square one type of thing, right?
Yeah, right. Great. Well, I think I just have one more assessment related question. And this one, there's a few people out there who have done a lot of self-taught work, or maybe they even have a computer science degree, and they want to know, why can't I test out of core? I just want to do capstone. I want to make a project. I want career support. Why won't you let me?
Yeah. And I think the answer here is that vast majority of people overestimate what they know. That's just what I've been seeing, right? But if, let's say, you're somebody who did not overestimate it and you know everything, it's great. You can actually just test out of it by doing the assessments directly, one after the other,
Right. There's no limit on the number of assessments you can take in a month or whatever.
You can do them all in like 2 days. Just one after the other if you want. I guess you got to wait for us to grade your assessment. But okay. that's our test. There's no other test. I'll give an anecdotal answer here. So this is many years ago, but somebody came in and was like, I have like 5 years experience. Can I just test out of it? And he's very, very persistent over email. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, let's hop on a call. I don't know. This email's like not working, right? So we hopped on a call, and he was just trying to like express why he needs to go through the core curriculum. Why can't I test? And I'm like, so you want me to just like ask you questions like in an interview? And he's like, yeah, just do it. And I'm like, but that's what the assessments are. And he goes, yeah, but I want like one interview. I'm like, okay, so you want to do like what you want to like compress it into one interview, like just do like a special thing for you. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. That's like a lot of time for me to do, right? Mm-hmm. And I might do it if you like ace the first couple assessments and then you come and you're like, hey, this is way too easy.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe like show me something, right? Otherwise, you're probably overestimating and underestimating our curriculum, overestimating what you know, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to be my assumption, unless you can prove otherwise. Yeah. So I convinced him to at least do one assessment the normal way, because then I'm like, all right, if you ace that, like maybe I'll talk to you, right? I don't know. We'll revisit this conversation. So convince him to take the first assessment, and as he was studying her, he sent me an email. And he's like, yeah, I see why you won't let people skip now. And the funny thing is this: he was so impressed by this process and how strictly we adhere to this. Later, he became an engineering manager himself on hiring, and he's hired a bunch of capstone grads. So, and he's never finished core, by the way, but he never, I forget if he actually even did an assessment or two or not. But I think it's one of those things where we have to hold the bar for this to work at all. Mm-hmm. You know, if we say, well, yeah, if this situation you can do this, and if that situation you can do that, that's the whole point of these assessments. That's the entire point. And frankly, everyone, like employers, are impressed that we do this, right? And this is why they have confidence to hire launch school grads. If we gave all sorts of exceptions, and all of a sudden it's meaningless again, right? Yeah, it doesn't mean anything to pass an assessment. So the answer is no. You can't test out. Or
in a sense, the answer is yes, right? There's no one's going to come and say, hey, you went through this course too quickly, slow it down. Yeah. You know, you can test out. It's not like there's 100 assessments either. There's not a ton. So if you want to go through the curriculum really quickly, you can. Yeah.
And also just like usually people ask that question because they want to participate in capstone. And it's like, capstone is not magic, right? Capstone assumes that you've passed all the assessments, that you know all the stuff in core, and we just throw things at you, and then we want to talk about it. It's like, here's the thing, we want to talk about it. Here's Docker, we want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's not fair to the other capstone people on your team if you haven't been held to that standard, right?
Yeah, can you do that, right? Yeah, like here's an article on Golang. We want to talk about it tomorrow. Right. And so you got to be able to like do all this and consume all this knowledge. And it's calibrated towards core graduates. Right. So.
Yeah. And one more thing on that is just that there's also the non-technical aspect. And that is a part of getting admitted into capstone, right? Is how you perform non-technically. So even if you could pass this like grand, boss level assessment, are you pleasant to work with? Like, am I going to want to put you on a team with other people who have passed all of these things?
Man, that is the absolute meta skill at launch school. It's actually so much more than technical. Like the technical stuff, I almost feel like is the easiest thing to teach now that we're here with our curriculum and wonderful student body, community, staff, exercise. We got the technical stuff covered, but this is why the workshops you're doing and the other workshop leads, is so important. We have the smooth start thing going on. So important. And in smooth start, it's non-technical. We cover study habits, we cover community, we cover how to basically be a great colleague, be a great student at launch school, which is exactly the same skill set that you need to be a great colleague. especially in a remote setting. A lot of jobs are remote now. So how do you behave in a remote setting? How do you learn on the job? It's all these things, right? How do you take notes? How do you think about work? How do you take apart work? These things are so important. And studying for the assessments, it's just like going to college. It's not, it's like, oh, I can watch all these YouTube videos. I don't need to go to college. It's like, I don't know. You learn a lot of different things, right? By joining clubs and other stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other things that's going on at launch school as you prepare for assessments, as you meet people, as you participate in study groups, as you join these workshops, as you listen to the podcast, that hopefully slowly changes your mind about what it means to be a software engineer. And it's definitely not just like generating code. It's definitely not just generating code. Yesterday, I was talking to somebody who is really young, going to participate in Capstone. He, just finished college a few months ago and, already finished core. Obviously very, very capable technically, but very, very, very fresh on what it means to be a professional remote worker, what it means to be a great colleague, right? And everyone thinks about like, I want a job that like, I'll get mentored, I'll get this. And I'm like, don't forget it's a job. You have to think about how you contribute.
Yeah.
Right? Don't forget that part, right? You want all these things out of your job. Don't forget to
what do you bring?
They're
to
paying
the
you a lot of
table?
money. Yeah. So you have to do the things that you want from them. I want them to help me. I want people to be great. I want people to be this and that. Okay. How do you get there? You have to be that to get there.
Yeah. Why don't you try helping out some of your peers and interacting and stuff like that? Yeah.
Exactly. Totally. So these are the things you learn as you participate in a program like Launch School that I think is in some ways more important. And in some ways, the harder thing to learn than technical concepts, right? And I feel like just that mindset of like flipping it around to like, what can I contribute is so critical and so important, right? It's just like you're seeing other students do stuff, right? And you're like, okay, why can't I do stuff? You can, and you should. And that's how you become a good worker too.
Yeah.
Right. Work is so, especially, this is something I said yesterday to that student, and he seemed to be caught off guard by it. But for people who with a lot of work experience know this intuitively, which is the higher paying the role, the more unstructured it is. Right. So it's not like you go to work, I can generate code, give me tests, I'll make the tests pass, I'll shut off my laptop, and that's it. Right. It's like those YouTube videos, like a day in the life of a Google engineer. And all they do is like eat, work out, and it's just like, and they're coding by themselves. They're not talking to anybody. It's just like, that's not real. That's not real at all. So much of it is figuring out what to do. So much of it is talking to people to figure out what to do, and once you figure out what to do, doing it is actually sort of the easier part of this whole thing. So the higher paying jobs, the more unstructured it is. The lower paying jobs are actually more structured. And so if you want higher and higher paying jobs, you have to learn to find work that is impactful, to understand what is impactful, right? It's like, how do I find what's impactful? Who's going to tell me that? You have to know what is impactful. How do I know what's impactful? You have to talk to everybody and understand the larger context of the environment that you're in, your department, your team, your company, the industry, right? You have to have some intuition about these things so then you know what's impactful. So then you can go do work that goes there, right? The higher you go, the less people tell you what to do, right? Because people think it's like, give me this assignment, I'll do it. It's not like that if you want high paying roles, right?
Great.
So these are things that you can learn in again, relatively safe environment. whether it's leading a spot session or participating in the various groups that we have, or doing, we have these tech talks that I have an open call for. No one really does them. I think we have one coming up, which is good. But these are all things that people can do. Unfortunately, the cost is always time, right? So
yeah, right. Great. Well, I think we really covered assessments. I feel like if you didn't know why we had assessments before, you must know now. Let's move on to talking about the curriculum a little bit. How do you decide the level of difficulty, right? Because very fluid. We could have much, much more in core, right? We could learn much more or we can learn much less. So how do you determine that?
Yeah. So when we first started Launch School, obviously it was like my take. But I thought it was a good take because at that point, again, I already had like 10 years experience, was doing a lot of hiring. And also I was already teaching for like 3 years at that time, 3 or 4 years at that time already, right? So it was my take at my shot at it. And over the last 8 years, it's been a constant iteration process. It's been a constant calibration exercise. And really, it's about observing our capstone alumni. I've said this many times already, but we've added a lot more to our networking course. We've decreased the severity of our SQL course because it was a little bit too severe. We've made the HTML, CSS assessment optional, right? We've added TypeScript recently, right? So all these changes to the core curriculum, sometimes are subtle, sometimes are not, right? Like when we change the calibration of certain courses, sometimes we don't make a large announcement about it, right? We just like either remove an assignment or tweak it so that's less severe. Sometimes a whole new course comes out, right? And it requires an announcement. But it's based on the market. It's based on our capstone alumni. We have a very, very active capstone alumni. There are eyes and ears in terms of what's relevant. And, we try not to focus on fads, right? There are certainly a lot of technologies that is popular among our capstone alumni that's not in the core curriculum. It's not like everything that we see is going to be added in there, but only do we feel that it's really, really important do we add it in there. We also first usually add it in capstone. And then we're like, capstone's full, right? We have no more room. That's how TypeScript ended up being added to the core curriculum. It was first made mandatory in capstone. And then we're like, we need more ability here. Because people are just seeing it a lot on interviews, on their jobs, added in the core curriculum. And that course is still alive. It's not, our content is always like this, where it may not be the best at first, but it will be over time as we continue to iterate on it, because we treat these things as live documents, as, we're constantly updating it. So, but yeah, the level of difficulty is totally calibrated, and the whole core curriculum is a live document. It's constantly being calibrated and updated.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too, because when you are looking into Launch School, as a student, or even if you're in the early courses, you don't see that it's fluid, right? You don't realize that one of these courses is brand new, or that in your journey during core, there's going to be 2 more courses added. So it is fluid. It's changing all the time. It's not a passed down recipe of the generations.
Yeah, it's not like books where like you have first edition, second edition, like years later, it'd be second edition. It's a big update. We're constantly updating. On a daily basis, right? It's just something's being updated every day.
Cool. All right. Next up. Why doesn't Launch School have a portfolio?
I think we do. First of all, we got projects going on. I get this question a lot. I think less often now, but certainly still comes up here and there. I think the portfolio thing is maybe is how like coding bootcamps sell their curriculum. Like after you take this curriculum, you'll have 5 projects. Well, that's easy to defeat that concern. After you finish our curriculum, you have 6 projects. Whatever they promise, we'll just do a +1 there, right? look, that's not the point, right? It's not 5 or 10, or the answer isn't like 12 or 50 or 3, you know. Ultimately it's about building your own projects, right? And again, back to like how we think about other vendors that we hire, right? If you're hiring like an interior designer and they're like, I took a course, and in the course there's like 3 design projects that they walked me through. And you're like, okay, cool, but like I want to see your portfolio is like what you did. That's not your portfolio, right?
Not stuff you were mentored through, right?
Yeah, or you followed a book or a tutorial or whatever. That's not what I consider to be your portfolio. What did you do, right? I want to see your work.
Yeah. So maybe it'll get you job interviews, right? I think that's the boot camp thing, is like, this is all the stuff you'll learn. And as someone signing up, you're like, what are all of those things? I don't know, but it sounds great.
I mean, honestly, that only works if there's a tremendous dearth of software engineers. And that, otherwise, how could that work? The fact that it worked at all is just a coincidence of the supply and demand of software engineers. But in anything else, it doesn't work, right? Like, you're going to hire anybody for anything, right? It can't be like, hey, I took a class, and in the class I did these. Cool. You'd be like, no, not cool, right? It's like, just show me your work. Like, do something on your own and then show me that, right? And then like, I'll see if that's what I want. So for launch school, it's like you can build an infinite number of portfolio projects after doing the core curriculum. Infinite, right? Whatever you think is impressive, 5, 6, 7, you can do 1 plus that, right? So I think the portfolio question is just like kind of a malformed question. It's a question asked. It's one of those like table of contents questions that gets asked a lot too, where it's like, do you cover this? Do you cover this? It's like, no, we don't cover it, but that's on purpose. We don't think it's important. Do you cover React? Not in the core curriculum. Well, this 12-week curriculum does. Yeah, I know. They cover everything for like an hour. This is not our philosophy, right? So, well, they cover like 20 topics and 5 portfolio projects. I don't know what the answer here is. Should we cover 21 topics and 6 portfolio projects in 1 less week? Is that better? You know, at some point, you're just like, that doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. At some point, that pitch just it doesn't make sense when we're trying to get like a high-paying job.
Yeah.
So
it seems like launch school is teaching people to fish, if we're using that metaphor, versus giving them fish, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So yeah, you build infinite number of portfolio projects after the core curriculum, and that's really the key of all this, right?
Great. One more curriculum-based question, and then we'll move on to kind of post-core questions. And that is, the community here is really interesting, and it's pretty strict. We have a really kind of tight guidelines there. What's up with that?
Yeah, is it strict? Yeah, I think it is strict, especially compared to previous teaching that I did, before Tea Leaf Academy and then Tea Leaf Academy. Did that for like 3 or 4 years. Did that for a long time. So had a lot of experience managing small learning communities. And we didn't have Slack. Slack wasn't invented yet, but we always had a chat room, always. Even when I did that, like, TDD API thing, we had a little chat room thing going on. What I observed was that the default nature of sort of that online community is a frat house. It's predominantly male-dominated participants, students, and with no rules, no guidance at all. The jokes just start to get edgier and edgier and edgier, right? And soon, like, it's only funny if it's like pushes it one small level higher, right? It's just because the previous thing wasn't funny anymore. I'll say that, like, at first I didn't pay attention at all, and I would say I even participated a little bit, right? And then I get like private message. It's like, hey, kind of found that a little bit, kind of we're entering a gray zone here, right? Like if it didn't cross a line, it's tiptoeing close to it. I'm like, yeah, I can see that. And try to tighten it up. Again, this is before Tea Leaf Academy and during Tea Leaf Academy. Struggle with this because we just didn't have like clear policies. It was just like be nice, right, kind of thing. Turns out that's not enough. So then try to enact certain rules. Just met a lot of resistance from the people that were there a long time already, that were used to the culture that was establishing. And it's one of those words. Culture is one of those words where it sounds like fluff. But at the end of the day, I think it's one of the most important things, if not the most important thing about any community, any place. There's a culture. What is the culture? And if you don't pay attention to that, the culture is a frat house. At least in tech, it's a frat house. So, so whether or not you're intentional about it, it's going to form. Something's forming, right? And so the question is, do you want to be intentional about that? What forms? I had to eventually create like a separate private room for those longtime students that wanted to have those edgier jokes, and because they didn't want to feel like new students were stepping on them, new policies were stepping on them. I had to create like a private space for them. And at first I was in there just to be with them. And then eventually I had to leave.
You're like too edgy.
It was yeah. And so, so coming to launch school, this is another thing besides the curriculum that we already talked about. Culture is something that I really, really wanted to pay attention to from the outset, having gone through that experience. And I just want to dial up the professionalism to like 100, not to 75, not to 85, 99, 100. Just dial it all the way up as much as possible. And that's what we are. And that's what work is too. Right. So
it's a great preview for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're uncomfortable here because of how tightly that is, it's almost like, well, once again, great learning experience, right? Because when you go to work, you need to dial it up to 100. It's not, 85 is not sufficient. A B level professionalism is going to get you fired.
Yeah.
It's got to be A plus, right?
Yeah.
So that's the environment I want to foster here, and I get a lot of private messages now saying it's great. That's why I like it here, and I like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I read this question at first, I didn't really get it because personally, I love it. I love that the default seems to be professional. The default is respect. And, we still have fun. Like there's, people sharing. I mean, everyone knows everyone's cats. Like we still have fun. But it has a very high standard of professionalism. And I love it. I think it's a great environment for learning. It makes people take the curriculum seriously. So I think we get more out of assessments and interviews because they feel very, professional and realistic and serious. So I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess if you didn't know that background, you would just be like, what's the big deal? But the big deal is that if you don't pay attention to it, it doesn't end up this way.
Okay, let's move on to a bit of post-core questions. Something, I think this is probably the question that I see the most, which is, why don't you have any support for core grads to get jobs, especially if they're willing to kind of start further down the ladder? Like, I want to start as a junior level and work my way up instead of going through capstone.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I think it's hard to promise support because of the price point. I don't want to falsely advertise that you're going to get this and that just because, I can't promise that at $200 a month, right? I can't even promise that $200 an hour, frankly, right? So a month is not there. But I would just say behind the scenes, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of support that's happening. I do a lot of one-on-one calls with core grads, just as a courtesy, so it's more unofficial. And again, I don't want to even promise that. Oh, Chris is going to unofficially do a one-on-one call with me. I'm like, no, I don't want to promise that. it's just like that, because that's just too much, right? That's too much obligation for the price. And I think that's one of the problems I kind of want to just bring up, which is cost is such a limiting factor for us because the guidance that people want is so custom, right? So someone's like, well, why can't you make a course? Why can't you do a video? We have videos, we have courses, right? I've between all the webinars I've done, I think there's probably like 5 hours of webinars. We also used to have a career services course that did walk people through how to approach a job hunt. The problem is that generates more questions. That doesn't solve the problem. That actually results in even more questions for people's individual circumstance, right?
Right.
You know, I am this and this in this location, this age, this level of education. What should I do? I am that, you know, and it's really, really difficult to do anything generic like a course or a video and have that bridge the gap. So it's like whatever we do, there's a big gap between that and a job. And a lot of it is individualized, right? So the cost really prevents us from fully bridging the gap, no matter what we do, right? So then the question is like, what are you willing to pay, right? And so one reason why you're not doing capstone, why people are doing capstone is because of the cost. So now we're negotiating like, all right, I'm willing to pay $3,000. Okay, what does that get you in $3,000? Okay, I don't know, get you like 10 hours. Like, oh no, I want way more than 10 hours. I want a guaranteed job, right? It's like, well, how am I supposed to guarantee a job, right? So it's like that negotiation is really, really difficult, right? And sometimes people are like, well, why don't I just pay like a staff member out of my own pocket? And I'm like, if you do that, I can't guarantee anything. You can't be like, I want a refund, or like this person didn't show up to my meeting or complain to me, right? Like, because we're not doing quality assurance. We're not doing that. Like Capstone, we have redundancies built in place. If somebody is sick, we have means to like backfill people, right? All that is thought through. If you do like a custom thing, it's just like nothing's thought through. It's very, very difficult. And it's also very difficult to like arrive at a result, which is a job, right? The other complication is that core grads are highly competent. This is one of the downsides of such a rigorous program, is that the only people who can advise core grads are very expensive people. Right? So if the limiting factor is cost and you're very competent, you're in a catch-22. Because you're like, I don't have money, but I'm super competent. Then only expensive people can help you. And then you're asking for charity, which is fine. I do charity all the time. It's not a big deal. I get to know core students, you know, and I like them and I want to try to help. But my time is not enough to fully bridge that gap, right? The other confusing part too is after core, there's so many things people can do. You can specialize in front end like React. You can specialize in back end. If you did a Ruby track, you can do Rails. You can go and do, you know, crypto stuff. We have people doing that. You can do AI stuff. You can do data science stuff. The opening of many doors is confusing. That's a confusing point too. So then again, you need like a experienced person to like help you walk through the pros and cons of all these things, right? So I think it's a combination of like being highly competent and having a lot of options and having low cost. That is like just all these conflicting forces that make it seem like it's difficult, right? I will say we've tried a lot of solutions over the years, especially with our T-Leaf Academy grads. And even early launch school, you know, the first capstone iterations are nothing like today. We did a lot of one-on-one mentoring in capstone for launch school. But I'll talk about a couple of things that I did. And this might hopefully give context for why capstone the way it is. So I formed groups of people to do a major project. This is T-Leaf Academy. Grabbed a couple, like three folks who did Tea Leaf Academy and then wanted to build like their own custom project. Because in Tea Leaf Academy, it's like you follow a tutorial, right? So the thing you build is like what we're showing you. So now they want to build their own project. Great. They're all capable. So I would be like the team lead. I did this several times, and every single time it's been this experience. The first thing is it's really hard to schedule people to meet together. It's just like I was basically an admin, like a secretary, just trying to get people to show up at the same time. Everyone has different schedules. They're all over the world. Even to meet twice a week is like really hard. The second thing is it's hard to make a project plan. Let's say like a 4-week, 6-week project plan, because we don't know how long people are going to be in this group. Because people get jobs, people leave, people have things that come up in their lives, and then they stop participating in this little group, right? And by the way, this is all for free. I didn't charge any money. It was just like I want to help, right? Very, 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 very difficult logistically and commitment wise, right? If people get jobs, great, congrats. And it's like I want to continue to finish it off. I don't want to leave you guys. Great. Of course, when push comes to shove, they're not going to work on this project because they already have a job.
They were investing in themselves, not in the project. The project was kind of a means to the end.
Yeah. So that was kind of a capstone light, right? So many issues like that. So that there are just so many issues that finally, when we did capstone, we asked for a severe commitment. We make people sign a contract. We made people talk to their families. I've talked to family members before. I've talked to parents before, right? We make people pay a down payment, right? The commitment is severe. And then we hold people here. And we make them promise, otherwise you violate the contract, you can't look for a job until this is done, right? So that's the commitment. That's how we get people here. And then we charge a high fee. And then we can bring all the resources to bear. Capstone is so hard to execute from everybody's standpoint, from the participants to our side, that if we were to, it's like a Jenga puzzle, right? Like if you remove one thing, maybe it's okay, 2 is okay, but as soon as you start to loosen it up, it's going to fall. It's so fragile, this system, right? It's so fragile. It's so easy to think that we can just do something else. But again, anything that we do, when you start to think about the cost, it starts to add up to basically the capstone price.
Right. If people want to do like a custom order capstone light, they end up adding on until they just have capstone.
Yeah, exactly. Or you run into all these other secondary problems that then you have to solve somehow, right? Like, why don't we just have like 10 hours a week of commitment or 20 hours a week of the commitment instead of the 50 that we're asking for capstone? I could do 20. Okay, then it's going to last 6 months. And then what if you get a job? You're not going to work on it, right? So so we've tried a lot of different things. I think the thing I want people to know is that we've tried a lot of things. It's not like I'm resistant to new ideas. It's not. I do see a lot of people new to launch school come in with a lot of suggestions, not knowing that we've tried like a ton of different things and not having thought through like these little edge cases, especially the uncomfortable topic of price. How much are you willing to pay? Right? It's just like, I want these things. What's the cost? And then by the way, once you pitch that, I have to think, well, do I want to do that for that price? Right. Can I do that for that price? Right. So it's not just be like, well, I'm willing to pay $3,000 for this. And then I can say like, well, I'm not willing to do anything for that price. Right. And so everything has to like come together and fit.
Yeah. Interesting. And I think it kind of brings things full circle too, because you say this is a big commitment. It's a high price tag. It's all of these things. But because you have gone through core with good grades, because you've gone through all of those assessments, it's a worthy investment, right? You've done all of the work. You've made it past that big filter that is core. And now you're at the point where making this big investment, this big commitment is a really safe investment to make. It's not a huge risk.
Yeah, I try not to oversell capstone either. I mean, I think, we have a document around the midpoint of the core curriculum that people can read. and I think it's very balanced. There's a lot of core graduates that don't do capstone too. So it's okay. Like I'm not.
Yeah.
I think it's up to us to prove the value of every step that we prescribe, right? So if we say this next course is coming up, and you should pay for another month to get that course, like we should provide proof that that's like useful,
right?
And same thing with capstones. Like that's a big jump in commitment and money, and especially if for people who, I think the biggest cost actually is opportunity cost, because we have a lot of people here who make a lot of money, frankly, in non-tech careers perhaps, or in software engineering adjacent roles like product, QA, things like that. They make a lot of money. So the actual real cost that they're concerned about isn't really the capstone fee. It's their job, right? That they have to give up for 4 months, and then a job hunt. So like 6 months plus, right? Of salary. So that's a major cost then, right? And so we're always trying to do a pros and cons analysis. One of the things I've been saying is we're doing more and more programming for our capstone alumni. My hope is that over the long run, the networking, the programming that we do, you're gonna get it all back, right, in the long run. And just the people, people pull each other up when. We've had some alumni get impacted by layoffs, and you can just tell people I rallied like, what's your stack? What are your familiarity? We have openings here and there. Come apply. I'll give you a referral, that type of thing. So, my hope is that in the long run, right, you get it back, even if you're making a lot of money. But ultimately, that's up to people to sort of evaluate.
Yeah, right. And there is value in core without capstone. But if you want to do capstone, if that's what you want, I think it's a worthy investment, right?
Yeah, like I said, I don't know any long-term core grad that's like can't get a job, and I don't know any core grad that has come to me that has said that was a complete waste of time, right? I didn't learn anything. So I've heard lots of people who've gone through other programs that have said that, right? They come to us and are like, that was maybe not the best use of my time. It was fine, but right. I have not heard that about the core curriculum.
Yeah.
I have heard some of the complaints we talked about today, with one of the main ones being assessments are too hard, interviews are too hard. I spent a lot of time, trying to pass this interview, and I don't understand why I have to do that. So.
Awesome. Well, that was the last question that I have here. This was really interesting. I think the questions we answered kind of give a full picture of why Launch School is set up the way it is. And you can see that direct correlation from pre-Goatee Leaf, this unnamed thing you did, to Goatee Leaf, all the way to now as it stands. So super interesting. I hope people enjoy listening.
Yeah, hopefully that provides some context. And I don't mean to say like, I don't want to suppress ideas. Like if ideas, I want to hear it for sure.
Totally.
Sure. Yeah. And this is how we improve over the years, is by hearing everyone's ideas, incorporating ones that we feel can be useful. So definitely, feel free to DM me, email, whatever it is, and happy to hear it.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much for answering those questions, Chris.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Okay. Bye.